David Rubenstein is the co-founder and co-chair of the Carlyle Group, one of the largest investment firms. He joins me now from New York. David, it is good to see you. You heard what you said and read what Janet Yellen said, all enormous economic repercussions that will spill over. Deutsche Bank is now calling for a recession in the United States, probably back end of next year. Do you think that's valid?
I think predicting recessions is a fool's errand. Nobody really can predict when a recession is going to happen, certainly that far out. The truth is the U.S. economy is actually doing quite well relative to the European economy and relative to the Chinese economy. We will have positive growth this year in the U.S. economy. I'm not sure that's true in Europe. I don't think a recession is in the offing, but it's clear that the era of free money is over, and it's clear that the war in Ukraine is having an effect on the global economy much more than people expected.
We've seen the minutes from the Fed, which was released this afternoon. Bizarre market activity. They read about the fact that the balance sheet is going to be reduced by up to 90 billion, and they saw the potential for half points. And the market fell sharply in the immediate half hour, and now it's since recovered. What's going on?
Well, of course, nobody really knows how markets react on an hour-to-hour basis. But I think initially, there was some surprise that the Fed was going to be so bullish on two things, or so direct on two things. One is that they're going to be $95 billion of purchases, in effect, not being done this each month. As a result, we're going to have $95 billion more in circulation of federal treasuries and corporate bonds. And secondly, it's very likely, reading the minutes, that we'll go to a 50 basis point increase the next time when the FOMC meets in May. So I think the Fed maybe have surprised people a little bit, but after a bit of reflection, I think the market recognized that this was a sensible course.
If we take that, the sort of the macroeconomic, which was not brilliant, but improving. Now we have the war in Ukraine on top of it. It leaves investors wondering what the best strategy should be.
Well, there's no clear end to the war. Yeah, I think the investors generally had the view that this would be a 1, 2, 3, 4-week war. It's clear that it might go on for a few months at this pace, and therefore we don't know what the end is, and therefore it's not clear what the best strategy is. It's also clear that energy prices are going to stay high for a while, and food prices are going to get even higher than they are now. So I think not clear what the best strategy is, but I think people should be prepared for a longer war than we once thought, for higher food prices than we once thought, and for longer term higher energy prices than we once thought.
And that feeds through to the entire economic cycle. I wonder whether many of us had convinced ourselves that the war would not have such a damaging effect on if you like, the rest of the world. But what we're now seeing is, as Janet Yellen said, that's simply not true.
Well, 30% of the wheat exports in the world come from Russia and Ukraine. And right now, it's very difficult to know whether those exports from Ukraine are going to occur at all at any meaningful level. So it's clear that the global economy has one gigantic supply chain and food chain, and everything is interdependent. And you can't have a war in one part of the world of any consequence without affecting the rest of the world. And it's also not even clear how you get out of this economically, because once the war is over, and there will be some truce, every war eventually ends, what happens to the sanctions? Do the sanctions go away? What happens to the oligarchs' yachts? Do they stay in the hands of the governments, or they get returned? Nobody really knows yet.
Later on this program, Ngozi Iweala, who you know is the head of the World Trade Organization, she says, and she'll tell us that bilateralism, that multilateralism has taken a knock and needs to be revised. But when it comes to trade, we can't go back to bilateral protectionism.
Well, I think it's the concern is that in the end, you can't have a few countries being so dominant. And I think, I can understand that perspective. But generally right now, I think the U.S. economy is still the dominant economy with respect to trade. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And I think the two next most important players, China and Western Europe, are still going to remain the two most important next players to the United States in trade. I don't think you're going to see a lot of new trade agreements, though. The U.S. government now has no interest that I can see in negotiating new trade agreements anywhere.
Absent a completely exogenous event where Ukraine is concerned, What is the one thing that we should keep our eye on in the weeks and months ahead? Or is it, I mean, is that a nonsense question because Ukraine is the exogenous event?
Well, the things that I think people should focus on, at least global investors, are number one, how high are the energy prices going to go? Are we going to be able to produce enough supply out of people releasing their strategic petrol reserves? Secondly, is the market's going to calm down as they realize that Europe is not going to ban Russian exports of oil and gas to Europe? And I think that's a big factor. That's not likely to happen. I also think that eventually people are going to have to recognize that there's going to be more interest in I'd say carbon energy than people thought. People thought it was going away, but people recognize that carbon energy is not going away as quickly as people thought it was. We're now very dependent on it still, and to be able to go into renewables is going to take some time. I also think you're going to see a bigger interest in cryptocurrencies because a lot of people are looking at this and saying, wait a second, you can take away my assets. If you can take away my assets, I want to have assets that cannot be taken away by governments. And I just think that'll fuel the interest in cryptocurrencies.
David Rubenstein, it is lovely to have you on the program. Thank you, sir.